CJLH, CJOC, CFAC, CISA. There have been a lot of changes over the years. We've been known as Channel 7, Channels 2 and 7, and now Global Lethbridge. Hi, I'm Ian McDonald, and this is a look back at Lethbridge Television and our role in the community over the last 50 years. I've been around for a little over half those years. I wasn't here for the opening of the station, but in 1995, we interviewed some of the people who were there.
I came here to Lethbridge, and that was in December of '54, yeah. And in the beginning of the year was when they were starting to, well, make the application, get all the details and information and so forth for the application, and that took, well, some time because there was a lot of engineering stuff that had to be done. And, well, eventually the application was approved and they started working on it.
From there, construction began. The building of a TV station was new to everyone. There were no local experts to call on, not even much expertise anywhere, since television was new everywhere. There were some stations on the air in other places, and so before construction started, a few people went on a road trip to see what others were doing right as well as wrong.
The management decided we'd drive to CKCK Television in Regina, CKX Brandon, to have a look at television that was already on the air. That was incredible. I mean, to walk into a studio full of sets that we hadn't sets designed yet, that was coming along after we got back, but that was an exciting trip because we finally saw it in action, you know.
I think there was, well, Bob Ray was the chief engineer at the radio station, was also designing and building a TV station. So he took all his engineers, loaded us all in the van, and we took off and went to Calgary, went to Brandon, went to Regina, just to see what their buildings looked like and what we could do.
Andy Dorina also went on a course to learn about how television works and the process for putting a show on the air.
It was mostly radio and with a little bit of television thrown in, because at that time radio was the big thing and then television just gradually coming in.
The construction was well underway. The TV station was starting to shape up. But while the technical side was well thought out, other areas hadn't been looked at too carefully.
We had a great program director in Bob Ranson. So Bob would sit with us, and we'd go through the magazines on the industry and so on to find out where things were and what was happening. And so all the excitement of just watching the building go up, the equipment arrive, not paying much attention to the fact that we had to perform, and what were we going to do when we got on television? That was the big excitement.
Bob Ray and I especially were involved in the engineering and design of the requirements, put it that way. And my really direct part was sitting down and designing the audio console. Bob was working on the video console, and I can remember sitting up in the control room about where it was going to be located. And
the on-air date was approaching rapidly. The station was taking shape. Wynne Duffy remembered the days leading up to the launch of the broadcast.
Mass confusion. That was before the station went on the air. And they're getting in furniture, and people moving around here and figuring out where they were going to go, and nobody knowing what they were doing, and all new staff.
This was a new experience. Everyone was anxious to get on the air, and mistakes were made.
Well, one of the things that happened was that we were so anxious to get on the air that they had fired up the transmitter to see if they could get a picture out, and all the scaffolding was still around the tower upstairs, and it radiated and burnt the tower, burnt the antenna, so we had to get it all knocked down to start all over again.
When the transmission tower was built, the interest of the city became apparent. People would drive all the way out to 28th Street North to see this new wonder of technology. When it was completed, it reached 638 feet. That sparked interest in the community, and newspapers were filled with ads for television sets. TVs were the hot item, and it seemed that every store in town was jumping on the bandwagon. The interest in television was so high that people were going to great lengths to see what it was all about, even though there wasn't a local station.
But the Ed Sullivan Show, for example, even before we went on the air, they used to take the Ed Sullivan Show over to the local Ford dealer on Saturday night, and he would bring in his clients, and they put the chairs up in the service area and run the show off the film for whatever it ran, 48 minutes or something like that.
The final preparations were made, and furniture was brought in. Some of it wasn't exactly what Win Duffy liked.
I still think of the sales manager, and he furnished the office, sort of, you know, bought the furniture for the office, and he picked chairs in chartreuse. And nothing you wore went with chartreuse chairs. And I always remember that. How on earth could anybody pick chartreuse chairs?
On November 20th, 1955, after many delays due to technical reasons, Channel 7 went on the air. Everyone who had a television set had been tuning in for weeks in hopes of seeing test patterns or even the glow of snow. And now it was time to see what television was all about.
All I do remember is that they went on the air with Father Knows Best, was the first program that went on the air.
But the local programs were the focus for most of the personnel at the station, and news was the first priority.
The staff wasn't too large, so they recruited some people from the newspaper and the radio station to help out, and I was sports editor at the Herald at the time, and I came out 6 o'clock, as I recall, and did a 10-minute sportscast for, I guess it was 6 or 7 months until they got things straightened away.
The tubes flickered to life, and Lethbridge got to see some of the people they'd been listening to or reading their columns for years.
We went on the air when the station first went on the air. It was Norm Young was the one-man news staff here then, and Sandy McCallum, who was a newsman at CJOC, handled the weather, and I did the sports.
What we had was we had one camera, but you had so much lights on it, we'd get a suntan by the time we get through with it. But it was not a very good picture. It was real fuzzy, and it was black and white, of course, and so everything was dark gray, and it was just a sort of a shade of a gray.
I prepared the script at the Herald and then would drive out, and in those days it was an old gravel road out here, and do the sportscast. It was 5 days a week. We didn't do Saturday and Sunday.
At 6:30, I read the news from a script something like this. And what we did then, there were no teleprompters in those days, so all we had to do was really read from the script like this. No teleprompter available. Head was bobbing up and down. On the earlier newscast, well, it featured written stories taken from the Lethbridge Herald and also culled from Radio CJOC. We filmed some local shots, stills, and also some films.
The newscasts were fairly simple. There weren't network feeds or reporters available, but the news went on the air Monday to Friday, most days.
Well, at that time, we didn't have any live camera. There was no network, so it was all done from film and slides. So basically what it was just radio with pictures and slides and film.
Getting on the air was no easy task. Each day there was a lot of preparation for putting the signal out.
Well, there was a panic to even get on the air because with the tubes at that time, there was a full-time job just keeping the station going. So before we started, there would be maybe a couple hours, the engineers would be tuning up the tubes and the transmitter, and just, you never know if you were going to really make it. There was quite a few times we were late because they just wouldn't tune up and wouldn't go.
Channel 7 was on the air, and local programs were being added. The studio, with its single camera, was buzzing with activity.
Slate at 7, we call it. Can you believe that? Monday through Friday, they came up with a name like that, Slate at 7. Earl LePage and Al McCann and sports. Blair Holland did our country show.
Slate at 7 was truly a variety show. Running daily at 7 o'clock, it featured people from all walks of life.
I started doing segments for, I guess it was Don Slade's show. It was an evening sort of magazine show. And my first interview was with Ruby Larson, who was a scientist out at the research station. I started doing that, but my audition had been making things for children. I'd taken a course that summer, so I made walnut boats and crayon fish. And so they wanted a show for children, and they came and asked me if I would be interested in it, and that started it all.
The show evolved. And it was much like Don Slade's show, showing a cross-section of the population of Lethbridge.
I was on for 7 years, but some years we were on 5 days a week, some days 2 days a week, some years 3 days a week. So it sort of depended on the network feed and network time.
The studio director, Corny Martins, was kept busy with designing, building, and managing sets.
Well, there was something new all the time. And the challenge of doing this artwork to me was it was a real challenge actually, and I enjoyed it very much.
We did everything live, so you really didn't have the luxury of putting on tape and banking it. So if you did a live show at noon, it went live at noon. If you had another one to follow up at 12:30 or 1 o'clock, you got the set ready or banged some Klieg lights around really quickly and got on with the next one.
I think it's absolutely amazing the things that we were able to do back in those days with one camera, one studio, and I thought a very professional look for those early years of television.
Part of the responsibility for that professional look was due to Corny Martins. He had the most fun preparing for fashion shows, building inventive sets.
One of the sets that I think I was particularly proud of was a set that had the models walking onto a table that I had painted on the floor. One of these ice cream wire tables, I had painted that on the floor. Then I had a wire table from home. I brought that in, and the lady announcing the show was sitting beside the ice cream table. At that time, there was a lot of smoking yet, and I had an ashtray made out of a tire, one of these tire ashtrays. Then I got a great big truck tire, or a tractor tire, and made a great big cigarette about 4 inches, 4 inches by probably 6 feet long.
We opened up this show with a tabletop and this tractor tire ashtray and a cigarette burning in it. With the one camera, we zoomed in really quick, so we filled the full screen with this tire ashtray, went out of focus, came back in focus on a real huge tractor tire in the studio, and did the fashion show on the edge of that. The depth perception was just phenomenal, and Corny was excellent doing things of that nature.
And the next day we had people asking us, phoning us and asking us how we had miniaturized the girls. We didn't do that. We actually made a set that was larger than life, like, you know.
The commercials were done by pushing the camera across the studio, usually while on a ballop, and then coming back live to the set. They didn't always go smoothly.
There were hilarious things that happened when you're doing live television. I remember rehearsing to do a BC Tree Fruit commercial, which called for the announcer to come on the set live eating a couple of cherries. Well, this is fine when you rehearse it because you don't eat the cherries, and then you come on and talk about the BC Tree Fruits. But you eat the cherries, the camera comes on. Now, what do you do with the pits? On with the commercial.
I remember one of them was quite good. We had a commercial on some kind of a tank, and in the commercial, the top of the tank came off real easy. Like all you had to do is just grab it and pull it over and lift it up. And one of the studio chaps was standing ready there. The camera went to it, and he hacked around on this thing trying to get it off. He never did get it off. We finally had to give up and come back to the announcer saying that this time it didn't work.
Yeah, we had a beautiful new Packard in the studio, and I didn't do the commercial on it, but it was the first real reaction to selling something live on television. And we were all up later in the evening in the control room when a salesman came out from the Packard dealership in Lethbridge with a client who had seen it on television and decided to buy the car. And we were so excited. I mean, television really works. You can buy something off TV. And the next thing you know, the client, who was an old person, an elderly person, I should say, with all due respect, got in the car and they opened the side door of the TV studio to back it up, but they had the gentleman do it, and then I guess he got flustered, put it into drive and floored the car, and it crashed into the wall of the studio. To our dismay, you know, that here's a beautiful new product. The first thing we got all excited about, and there was dust and smoke coming down, but fortunately not too much damage to the car or the gentleman.
Or the instant on television set. I remember that one wasn't plugged in. We finally discovered this during the live commercial, got it plugged in. Of course, it still takes about 45 seconds to warm up before it becomes instant on. So the instant on live commercial didn't work very well first time out.
And Bob Lang, who a lot of people remember, he's in Edmonton now, he ran a kiddies show. And it was sponsored by the company that puts out apple juice. And each week Bob would sort of run his own commercials, and he would go over and say, and remember kiddies, is clear, pure apple juice, and he'd pour it out into a glass. Well, what he didn't think of was that the show was on the air once a week, Saturday morning, I think. So the can of apple juice, he just sat it behind the set, and it would sit there for a week. So the second week he come out, and remember kiddies, is clear, pure apple juice, and he'd pour it out into the glass. The third week, came time for the commercial, he just reached behind the set and took up the can of apple juice, and remember kiddies, the clear, pure apple juice. And it went plop. It was solid as thick syrup.
One of the better live things, as a matter of fact, I think I did on the Channel 7 News in those days, which I call my best fluff of the 50s. I was describing here a commercial, as a matter of fact, talking about the apple juice from the Okanagan Valley, and I called it Sunripe Applescent Opal Juice instead of Sunripe Opalescent Apple Juice. Well, that's really a jawbreaker, you know. Sunripe Opalescent Apple Juice, that's what it was. I called it the other. I don't even try to pronounce it even the wrong way then.
Again, I remember a fellow, we had to do a clothing commercial one night, and it called for snow falling, so we had a fellow up on the grid blowing the snow off a board that we had set up there, and he fell in the middle of a live commercial. It made for some exciting television. I don't know if I think it was Black's Menswear. I'm not sure they sold many coats or overcoats that day, but it was exciting.
The television station continued to evolve. Staff members left and replacements were hired, and new shows came on the air.
You were your own producer. You know, you'd get your own show pretty well. But we had it, if we had interviews, people that had written books, I would look in the Lethbridge Herald and see who was in town and who was available. And then we had crafts. I depended on people. You know, Georgia was a hands-on person. She demonstrated all the time. Well, I was more of an interviewer and had people demonstrate their crafts, and we had some cooking shows, and we had the Ann Campbell Singers came, and just anything and everything I could get. And it was such a novelty at that point that people were glad to come on. At least I never had any trouble getting people.
Dan chose to call it Something for the Ladies, and it was just to get 3 days a week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, items that would be of interest to the ladies in southern Alberta. And so it was more or less open to me as to who I asked, and also people would request appearances because they wanted to promote a craft show or tea or whatever was coming up. And I was very pleased to do that.
We used to do an hour-long show, and you'd have 3 interview segments. But I was very fortunate because I never really had to go out and seek for them. And there was never any pressure, you know, you've got to interview this one or interview that one. And so they would give me carte blanche, and I'd get a call from one of the local pubs. Is Joni? And I'd say, yes. I've met someone you should interview. Oh, who's this? Is a man who worked carnies all over the place and burlesque and this kind of thing.
We did a sports quiz show that was very popular here. Al and I, and we'd invite a guest each week, and we had a moderator, a fellow named Jim Waddell, who also was a radio type at CJOC. And this was a half-hour show, and it came on, I remember, every Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and we had some good sponsors who would provide the prizes.
I had occasions when I brought animals in. I remember bringing Dixie Gray, the daughter of the late Dick Gray, the hockey player and the feedlot operator. His daughter was quite into the equestrian and brought her horse on one night, and we talked animals and dressage and all that, and it was interesting. We brought turkeys in one night, I recall, so interviews with people and animals, I guess.
They used this puffy white stuff for the cake. And the thing was, it was a huge cake, and then they were going to just put the things on and they would light the candle. And at that time, guys were still smoking, and somebody went by with a cigarette, and the thing went all up in smoke just as we were going to go on the air.
We made mistakes, and we had to sort of cover up. I had a friend in from Faye Beezer from Cardston who was showing us how to make pie crust in her special way, and there was a fly. And the fly got, of course, mixed in with the pie crust. And it, we just had to throw it out, start again, and laugh over it.
There was a kitchen set built right over here, right along there, right in this same studio. This is weird. And he was the cook. He had a big tall hat on, and a white apron and everything. He had 2 eggs on the counter, and he picked one up to crack it, and they laid the other one on the counter. And as he started to crack the one egg, the other one started rolling. And it rolled right over and plopped down on the floor, right about there. Well, it was live camera again, and what are you going to do? So then he just picked up the ladle, went right around the front of his kitchen set, down on his hands and knees, scraped the egg up off the floor, and put it in the plate, back around, on with the cooking show. It didn't even faze him.
We had a situation where we used to switch. I switched the television. And on one side we switched for CJLH, and the other side, just a divider in between, we switched for CFCN television. So the problem was, when you went to a Sunday morning shift for CFCN, there were 2 major problems. One of the things was you had to be in at 9 in the morning on a Sunday morning after partying all Saturday night. And the second thing was you were there at 9 o'clock, but you just had to watch it until 11:55 when you had to push one button and cover an ID from Calgary, so you got the local Lethbridge ID. So you're there for 2 hours, and wouldn't you know it, they've got the most comfortable chair in the whole wide world there. So I'd stagger in Sunday morning, still recuperating, have my feet up in this cushy chair, my feet up on the console, and of course with religious programs and gardening programs and things, you're watching it for a while, trying to do your job attentively, and before you knew it, you'd be nodding off. And the second time Bob Johnson caught me asleep just before the ID, and he walked in just to check the shift situation, he offered me an opportunity to get employment elsewhere. But I stayed awake and kept my job down there until I got the opportunity to come to Calgary. But it was a great lot of fun, and it was fire prevention week. Fortunately, the week he caught me, so he couldn't fire me.
But around Christmas time, I decided to cook a turkey. And we had a gentleman in Lethbridge who was really good at carving roasts and turkeys, etc. So I asked him if he'd come on and demonstrate how to carve a turkey. And he said that yes, that would be fine, he'd be glad to do it. So I put the turkey in the oven the night before and got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the oven hadn't come on, so there was the turkey raw as could be. So I cooked it partially. I didn't have time to cook it all, but I brought it out anyway. And the crew, I had told them not to bother bringing their lunches, that we'd have turkey, and I made a couple of salads. So anyway, here was this half-cooked turkey, and that poor man to try to carve it, and it was like it was black and white because, you know, you couldn't see the blood coming out of it. The joints were so stiff, and oh, it was terrible. And of course, nothing for the crew then to eat.
I must tell you about Al McCann, or better still, Al McCann's car. He had this car, and I was driving with him one time, and he was showing me that he didn't have any brakes. You know, he's going like this. He says, look, hey, no brakes, no brakes. I said, well, what are you doing? You're a menace on the road with this blasted thing. He says, look, I got 6 gears in here, and he was showing me how he didn't have to use the brake because he has the 6 gears. Needless to say, I decided that that was my first and last trip with Mr. Al McCann.
This one farm show, McFadden Motors, Barry McFadden, came by late just before the show and wondered if he could have us do something a live ad on a new Honda power generator, which was gasoline powered. So they said, would you do this? And I said, sure, I'll do it. So the time came for the commercial break, and so he reached down. I said, well, power it up. And he reached down and pulled this gasoline engine on, and the sound was just horrendous, of course. I think it blew everybody's ears away. And then, of course, the light he gave me, I had this big spotlight about 1,000 watts, and I was shining it around, shone it right into the lens of the camera. Everybody's screens at home went white, and the cameraman's eyes went red, and that was, of course, because we were live, and had we had tape facilities of today, we would have done it again and avoided all this. But it was kind of humorous looking back at it.
The cameraman was watching doing a show, like the news, and then you had to rush across the studio because you only had one camera, so during the slide presentation, maybe 30-second commercial, you had to take the camera and rush across the studio to the other end and catch the commercial that they were doing, and then he took off and you turned the wheels on the camera. Then when he got there, he jammed the wheels the other way, and the whole camera and everything fell over on the side, and he's down on the floor and he's still trying to focus to get a picture sideways.
One thing that has always been a big part of the mandate of Lethbridge Television has been to provide news and information for the farming community. We've had men like Omar Broughton, we've had men like Ron Watmo, and we've even had guys like DJ Doug Card. Now, the reason I say Doug Card is because we made a song up about Doug Card. I went to the Royal Winter Fair. DJ Doug Card was there. For the time of your life, get rid of your wife and come with Doug Card to the fair, the fair. I don't know if they still go to the Toronto Fair, but if they do, there's a little song for you to remember.
I remember once the Coaldale Rotary Club was raffling off a hog to make some money. And Les Hadley, whom we worked with an awful lot, asked if he could advertise this on the shows. So we had him, I said, well, sure, bring the hog out. And we stood in the studio right about there. I can almost feel it. And there were a lot of people around, and Les brought this hog in on a little tether, and it sat here grunting away. And Les and I were standing there talking about this big deal they were going to have and raffle off this hog. And the thing walked over, and I didn't even see it, but it was standing right beside Les. It just leaned down and clomped its jaws right around my foot and bit right through my shoe. I could feel it. And I said, Les, your hog just bit me. And he burst out laughing. He thought that was the funniest thing that ever happened.
I won't say who it was, but some of the parties got pretty raucous, and I can remember one of the announcers climbed the tower, and that caused quite a bit of consternation. In fact, I think he was actually off air for a while because of that.
Another incident that occurred there in the studios there in Lethbridge. When I was ready to prepare for the news, I had to put some makeup on, and that was located in the Graphic Arts Department. Well, I headed for the Graphic Arts Department very rapidly. And then when I opened the door, lo and behold, there were 12 Lethbridge models there dressing. Yeah, that's right. And what did I do? I just looked, stared at them for a second, and I froze. I just looked, I froze, then I fled. It so happens that, of course, I was outnumbered by the ladies, very beautiful women too. The girls laughed, and then they put on their fashion show later without any problem, and that was it.
Yeah, we had a kids show on there, and I'd sit behind a couch. I don't even remember the host of that thing is the problem, but we do this kids show, and I drew a little puppet on my hand and called it Eloise of Fist, and the puppet would talk along with the show host, and we had a lot of fun. And the odd time, the guys would, I'd be lying down beneath the couch or something, and someone would be yarding my leg, pulling my leg, and I was trying to concentrate and stay on the scene. But it was really a fun atmosphere, and the people were very, very talented. People now working in broadcasting all across Canada. There's guys in Edmonton, Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg. There's people who traveled around the world that were working at CJLH at the time.
I remember one occasion where somebody, I'm not going to mention names here because I might get somebody in trouble, but he is a chief engineer of the station at the present time. I believe his name was Jovenaz, I'm not sure, but he was an instigator in going out and one of the telecine operators, and he took black poster paint and painted his headlights all black so that when he got in and turned his lights on, nothing happened. Well, we all had a good laugh over that, and things of that type was, it was really good. They jacked his car up one time, and just so the tires would just turn, and of course didn't know why the car didn't move, and a lot of fun.
The stories these walls have witnessed are immeasurable. I know we've only touched the surface of what makes working at Lethbridge Television a good memory for so many people. And the station lives on, affecting the lives of both the people who work here and the community in general.